Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian, and today we have an author in the studio, Michael Medrano. He's a local author as well. Michael, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Sevag.
Talk a little bit about why you decided to get into writing.
Wow. I would say back in the 90s, actually my story starts in politics. When I was a student at Fresno City College, I was in Mecha, which is this Chicano student protest group that started in the 60s and whatnot. But from there, I was going to rallies and from there I was going to rallies and whatnot, and I would always run into poets, ironically, or owners of small presses who always had their books out. And so, you know, I was always going through books and buying books, and one fella, Charlie Trujillo, I was really impressed. He was the first Chicano that I knew that I met who owns a press. And so he was telling me all about all of the projects he was doing, and I just kind of went from there to taking a Chicano literature class. So.
When you say owns a press, what are you talking about there? I mean, there's actually a machine in the garage or something, or what?
There's still people who do the old school letterpress. Now with the digital age, we have digital printing, which makes the job much easier, you know. So yeah, there's a lot. Actually, there are a whole slew of presses out there.
Have you seen a press? I mean, what do these things look like? They look mechanical?
Arte Americas across the street has one.
So there we go for our audience members who want to see one.
Right.
Downtown Club has an older one, but
right, yeah.
that was an old one.
Mm-hmm.
And so what got you to keep going into writing? I mean, it's not a occupation where you can get rich very fast. I mean, it takes several books. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of my first teachers was Juan Felipe Herrera, who's now the State Poet Laureate. And he's a fabulous teacher, an amazing teacher, still teaches over at UC Riverside. And I took a couple of classes from him at Fresno State, ended up working with his theater group. And his whole thing was to bring theater and to bring movement and the physicality of art into your writing. And so I really honed in onto that, you know, and also just taking classes at Summer Arts where you were working with master artists. And then I got my bachelor's in English at Fresno State and studied under Connie Hales, who's a wonderful poet herself and teacher, who actually encouraged me to go on to graduate school to get an MFA in creative writing. And so I did that, you know, but also doing open mics throughout the valley.
And by open mic, what do you mean? Just taking your book or poem to a restaurant and, you know, like singers sing, you just go up there and you read?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And or spontaneously in the middle of a grocery store in the produce section, which we've done.
Yeah, wait a minute, I gotta stop you there and ask you about that.
Sure.
So you're in the produce section
Right.
of a grocery store. What do? Do you whip out your book and say, I'm going to read?
No, you whip out the book or whatever poem you have, or if you have it memorized, even better, and you just read the poetry. You don't even preface it. You just go right into it.
And do people crowd and listen to you, or do they wonder what you're doing? I mean,
both. Absolutely. This was actually a sort of a project that me and a buddy of mine, Brian Medina, that we did about 10 years ago. So we had this camera with us, video camera, digital camera. We were just taking it around the city and just reading poems in random places. Fashion Fair Mall, the produce section, reading Ginsberg's poem called, well, it was about the grocery store. I can't think of the title right now, but yeah.
And so the first time you did this, what's going on in your mind? And are you looking at the audience, or are you just concentrating on whatever you're reading?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's sort of like mental acrobatics, you know, because you have to balance not only the poem and what you're going to read, but also you have to pay attention to your audience, because not only are you looking to see if they're checking it out, but you have to make sure that you're not bumping into anybody. So it's a little bit of this whole navigation in literature and all.
Where, other than the grocery store, what other random place have you read at?
Oh, wow. Sears and the men's bookstore, and I've written about that experience. There's an article that I wrote about that specific experience reading in Sears. It's on the Poets and Writers magazine website, pw.org. And so that was like probably 2000 maybe. But also bookstores, of course, bars.
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 So, and people are drinking around you, and you get up and you decide you want to read. What's the reaction?
Well, in the bar, it was more of a coordinated reading. So it was an event that was happening, and it depends on what the experience is. Sometimes you have a coordinated event, but then you have customers who are not even paying attention to you. I've done that at Audi's Olympics. This was when it was Club Fred's. And so there was a bunch of us who were reading that night, and you had maybe, your average number of drinkers getting drunk and not really caring about what we have to say. But that we have to overcome that, But yeah.
Speaking of overcoming, how hard was it for you to overcome the fear of actually reading in front of people? I mean, here you are, you have your personal story or poem. I mean, you're putting it out there,
Right.
and when you put something out there, people will either love it, and if they don't like it, they'll tell you. How hard was it to overcome that?
I don't think it was that hard, simply because when I was a student activist, I was used to talking in front of people. And so that didn't really faze me. But it was just I think at the beginning when I was reading my poetry, I was screaming, I was literally yelling, screaming my poetry, not to the point where it became just annoying, but there was a rhythm to it. But one of my mentors, Margarita Robles, once she took me to the side and said, "You know what, Mike, you don't have to read like that. Breathe. Let the poem breathe. We want to hear your words. You're a great poet, but just allow the poem. Take your time with it." I said, okay, cool. So since then, I've been able to, read poetry, and just, people will enjoy the effect of your word as opposed to your animated self. That will come. I think that will come with you just be comfortable with the poem. So,
how important is it for you to take advice from other writers? I mean, a couple of weeks ago, Nick Billardis from Bakersfield was here, and he connected with you, and you're mentioning all these poets and all these authors. How important is it for that connection to occur?
Absolutely, very much important. Poetry community or literary community is essential, and simply because the writing lifestyle is a very solitary lifestyle. It may take years for you to get your work out. You may spend years working on a project, but it's that connection that you have with other writers, especially if your friends are coming out with books and you go to their readings and vice versa. And it makes for a great relationship. And also with the internet and writers connecting, I've got friends all over the United States who are doing great work, even all over the world.
And do you want to travel to these places and read? I mean, what is your goal?
Yeah. Well, I have. I mean, when my first book came out, Born in the Cavity of Sunsets, this is kind of like having your first book, having any book is kind of like your ticket to travel. I mean,
so once you got the book out, then we're set.
To an extent, sometimes you do have to pay a little out of pocket to pay for gigs. Sometimes you get lucky and they fly you out and they put you in a hotel and you do the reading and the book signing and all of that stuff. But most of the time it's just the hard work and you getting there on your own dime. But the idea is to get your work out there and to connect with others from all over, all over.
Do you ever worry that getting rich in this game is too tough?
I guess I do worry about that simply because I haven't seen any profit, any motives for profit yet. But hopefully that will come. I would welcome it. I wouldn't, But
and do you think that there's a misconception out there that authors are always going to be rich. We hear of like Soroyan or Mark Twain and some of these other authors, Stephen King, some of these authors.
Right.
And do you think there's that perception that just because you put a book out, now you're making money?
I think on the surface level there is. I think there's both. I think people often think of the writer as the poor, starving artist, any artist really, and you're just trying to. You're hopeless, but then you break it big. It's that American dream, and you're famous overnight. Now it's all relative because I know writers who've gotten great national attention for their book, but they're not rich. Maybe they've gotten an advance to write their next book if they're lucky, or maybe just getting paid to do gigs is good enough. Most writers do have a job, do work.
And that's what I was going to ask you.
Right.
Do you have another job on top of this, or is this what you're doing?
Oh no, I teach at Fresno City College. I teach English, and also I have a community workshop called Random Writers Workshop in the Tower District, which is actually I would say the sister chapter of Nick Velardis' Random Writers, which he started in Bakersfield. So we kind of co-collaborate.
Are you welcoming non-authors to join? I mean, is this club exclusively for authors?
No, absolutely not. Actually, everyone's at a different level in the game in terms of writing abilities. I have a couple of students who are actually MFA graduate students, and they're getting their degrees in creative nonfiction and poetry. I have novices who are barely just trying to get they have something to say, and they just want to put it down on paper, but they don't have a community. So I try to at least establish some sort of community. But and I'm also bringing in other poets, other poems from favorite poets, and just exposing my students to different literatures, and also the readings, community readings, and inviting them out to community readings and whatnot. So,
when will you tell yourself you've become successful at this? I mean, when do you sit back, enjoy a nice glass of wine, and say, I've done it?
I don't know. That's a good,
or you might be there already.
I might be there,
a lot of people know of you, and a lot of people know that you're out there writing. I mean, you might be there already, but in your mind, when is that point?
Oh man, I would say there's a lot of small victories, but not the big trophy. Lots of division championships, but not a whole lot of Super Bowl, World Championship rings. So I don't know. I mean, I guess it's all relative. I mean, ideally, I would love to get paid to write. Obviously that's a dream. I think that's any writer's dream. But if that time comes, it comes. If it doesn't, oh well, I'll just continue. I'll continue teaching and whatnot, which I love. I love teaching.
Has the teaching benefited you? You think? I mean, a lot of times the coach coaches and the coach gets better. Is that the same for you? You're teaching English.
Absolutely, I think so. I think you learn what. It's really interesting. I think you learn what doesn't work. So you're like, okay, I've done all these things that work, and all these things don't work, so I'm not going to do the things that don't work. And I think that's what makes you ultimately a better teacher, if you just don't repeat your mistakes.
What
and
do you
love your subject. So.
What are you seeing in the classroom? Are you seeing that people are, there's that everybody talks about it. It's, the text language where it's you, instead of, the correct way to say it, or C instead of SEE. Are you seeing that in the classroom as well?
You mean grammatical errors?
Grammatical errors.
Well, most definitely. I think with writing, and a lot of my students, this is the first time they've actually taken an essay writing class. They're scared, they're nervous. They're trying to model what they think is successful writing. It's not that they're, that they're just dumb or anything. I wouldn't say, I would never say that, but I think it's more or less they're just trying to model good writing, and they miss it because they need to be in my class.
The community around here, writers, do we have a lot?
Absolutely, yeah, we do.
And where are they? I mean, where are they?
That's funny. There's this. I'll start with this anecdote right here. There are two very famous writers. It was Philip Levine who's from Fresno, obviously, but he also spends his time in New York, and W.S. Merwin. And so they're best friends, I guess. They hang out. They're at least contemporaries. They're hanging out in Central Park, right? This young girl approaches them, young college-age girl, and she says, oh my God, I can't believe it, it's you, oh my God, oh my God. And they're like thinking, wow, we must have a fan of poetry here. Now Merwin and Levine have published many, many books. Both have won Pulitzer Prizes. You know, Levine has won the National Book Award. So the creme de la creme of poetry right there in Central Park. She's like, I was trying to look for some couple of senior citizens for my gerontology project.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so there's poetry, and there's the fame of poetry not being recognized. You can have a famous writer anywhere in the room, and you will never know. But there is a great community here. Philip Levine, of course, Gary Soto, the late Andres Montoya, who was one of my first poetry teachers, Tim Hernandez, Marisol Baca, the late Roberta Spear, who was from Visalia, another amazing poet. So lots of great tradition here.
Do you all hang out other than the random writers? I mean, do you have coffee together, or do you all hang out with them? And what's the conversation like?
And once in a while, you know, we'll have, it's just like anything. You just invite a friend for a beer or a cup of coffee or whatever, and so you talk about poetry sometimes, you talk about the weather, you talk about politics, you talk about everything, you know.
You're on Facebook, and you do social media.
Yes.
Talk about the importance in today's world with social media and authors.
Oh, wow. I think it's a good way of becoming very visible very fast. I think it's just like any other time, except for it's incrementalized, you know, it's compacted. I think I think if there weren't the social media, writers would still be going out there and hoofing it, because, you know, we were doing it before MySpace, and going out there and making connections and networks. I think now, though, you've got an opportunity to work with multiple networks as opposed to maybe 2 or 3 networks. You can work in maybe double that easily, you know.
Does it matter how many books you put out? I mean, does that play any factor?
Oh,
I mean, does it give you credibility or what?
Oh, sure. I think, yeah. The more work, and if it's great work, the better, you know. But I mean, every writer is different. There's poets who are amazing poets and will come out with a book every 10 years or so. There's Jack Gilbert comes to mind, who's, my God, he's probably one of the best poets who ever lived. He passed away, was it a year and a half ago or something like that? And he won the Yale Younger Poets Prize, which is huge. And then he would come out with a book every 10 years. Everybody would be like waiting for that book to come out. And every time he came out with a book, he blew everybody out of the water. You know, he was amazing. It's not that he was only writing one book in 10 years. He was writing, I'd say, he was writing a whole lot of books, but just this is the one that worked.
Speaking of writing books, you've got another book coming out that you're working on right now.
Yeah.
Tell our audience members about this book. Hector's in it, isn't he?
There's a character by the name of Hector Rodriguez, and Hector's kind of a reoccurring character in my poetry as well. So there's a lot of Hector poems. So now there's this Hector YA young adult novel that I'm working on.
Why Hector? I don't mean to.
I don't know.
You like that name?
I do. I have no idea. When I was a graduate student in Minnesota, there was a town called Hector, Minnesota. So that was right around the time when I started writing all these Hector poems. Was in Minnesota. So I was like, that's kind of cool, you know. It's a Greek god, Hector, but it's also Spanish too at the same time, which is really ironic. But I thought it was kind of cool to see Hector, Minnesota, while I was writing Hector poems. So I just kind of stuck with it.
And so who is Hector in this new book you're working on?
Hector is probably a composite. It's mostly me, but but probably any other 14-year-old who's just trying to fit in and looking awkward doing it. You know, I think that's 14-year-olds for you.
So what happens to Hector in this book?
Hector hangs around with a kid by the name of John Brown, and John Brown is a kid who wants to be Mexican. So there's that element too. I think we want to be other cultures if we're hanging out. I mean, that was sort of my experience in going through K through 12. But John Brown wanted to be Mexican, so he changed his name to Juan Café. Yeah, café is brown in Spanish. So there's that kind of element, and Hector gravitated towards John because he got all the girls, and but
So John was a handsome young kid.
he was a handsome kid. Yeah, he was a handsome kid, but kind of a loaf in a way, you know. And I think that was damaging for him and also for Hector, because Hector always was there when John was loafing, and so before you know it, they're stealing cars and unsuccessfully.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
So they're going the wrong way.
Right. Unsuccessfully, work program, that whole bit.
So, without spoiling the book, does it end in a positive note?
Well, I haven't finished it,
Oh.
so I really don't know. I mean, my planned ending, the ending that I'm kind of going for, is it's a bittersweet ending, but I don't know if it's going to work or not. We'll see.
Is that common for you to change things around? Let's say that you finish it with a bittersweet ending, and then one day you get up and you say, you know what, I don't want to end this way, and you change it. I mean, is that common?
Absolutely, it's common to even throw it away.
Throw it away. Wow.
I don't think I'll throw it away, but you send it to your friends who are trustworthy readers. Like this book right here, I'll send it to Nick Willardis. He's a good guy, and he'll tear it up and say, this is not working, but this is working, you know. So you just kind of do that. That's how you also build friendships through the literary scene.
Do you think there's great material out there that's hidden in a drawer somewhere because someone is afraid to bust it out?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And what advice would you give somebody who has an idea or is working on a book and is kind of hesitant?
Send it out. Send it out. Join a writing circle or start one yourself. Send to magazines, literary contests, and just get your name out there. Even if you get a bunch of rejections, the idea is to at least establish, you might meet somebody, and you never know what's going to happen. So just stick with it. Yeah.
What's the difference between self-publishing and having someone else publish your material?
There's different elements to that. There's what they call the vanity press, which is the press where you actually pay someone and they publish your work. You know, they print your work, basically.
And you have control over it to sell it to whoever you want?
And yeah, absolutely. You have control over, you're basically buying the copies, and they're yours, and you do whatever you want with them, you know. Some of those vanity presses are scams, so you got to watch out. But they're out there. It's a good way of having a book, and if you want to do like a reading for close friends or family or whatever, it's a good thing. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult if you're trying to build some sort of literary status, you know. So traditionally, the traditional press model is the best way to go, and that be the small press or university presses, who are always looking for newcomers. So, yeah.
How hard is it to break into that market?
Very tough. It's very competitive. I mean, they have contests like crazy. You submit to these contests. You pay $28-$30, to have someone read your book. I just recently submitted a poetry manuscript to a contest. I don't know, I believe it was $75 was a reading fee.
$75 reading fee.
75. But it's a multiple book. It's a multiple book contest. They're going to publish multiple books at a university press. So it's kind of a risk. But usually with contests like that, there's an incentive. You might become a year subscriber to their magazine, that sort of thing. So you're not entirely getting ripped off.
Are there contests like that in Fresno? I mean, is this something we need to bring out, or does it exist already?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it exists in various facets. I know Fresno State, they do a yearly annual manuscript contest through I believe through the Normal School, which is their literary magazine, and they publish a book once a year. So I think this year you have Philip Levine who's reading, and he picks the final manuscript. and that manuscript gets published at a small press. So.
This is a tough question, but how do people like Philip Levine, how does their work get so popular, do you think?
Man.
I mean, it's everybody talks about Soroyan,
Yeah.
and you know, how did that happen? I mean, just a chain reaction or luck, or what do you think?
I think it's a little bit of luck. I think it's 80% talent, 90% talent. I mean, there are a lot of talented writers out there that only have one book, and will only have that one book. And there are luckier writers, trying to get that second book published. That's me. I'm trying to get the second book published. But Philip Levine, I mean, his work is just amazing, and I think just amazing work, and people want to publish amazing work,
How did it feel when you got the letter from the publishing company? You're holding a book in your hand that we talked about, but how did it feel to get that letter saying, congratulations, we want to publish your book?
Yeah. Well, that was great. I found out online. He sent me an email.
That's a form of letter.
Hey, absolutely. And so, congratulations, we really enjoy your work and we want to publish your book. And first I thought it was, of course, you're always thinking, oh, it's another rejection, but this time it wasn't. So it was awesome.
You mentioned something that a lot of authors talk about is rejection. In publishing your book, it's no secret.
Right.
You get a lot of rejections.
Yeah.
What advice do you give to people who have gotten 7, 8 rejections?
Keep sending it out, because 7, 8 is nothing. Who was it? What's his name? Bless Me Últimas, Rudy Anaya. His book, I think he got over 200 rejections.
200 rejections,
Absolutely.
But that one who accepted it made him popular.
Yes, yeah.
How can people find out more information about you? I mean, your work. Where can we buy this book, Born in the Cavity of Sunset?
Yeah. Well, I'm on Facebook. You can find me there, Michael Medrano. I'm also, you can also email me at medranopoet@gmail.com. And the book itself is available through Amazon, and you can also buy it through the press at ASU, that's Arizona State University, asu.edu/BRP for Bilingual Review Press, just to support the small press. So,
congratulations, Michael. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. To the volunteer crew that made this and every production possible, we couldn't do it without you. To our fans on KFSR 90.7 FM listening to this broadcast, or for those watching us on CMAC TV, thank you. Our guest this week was Michael Medrano. He's a local author. Check out his work. Tune in next week for a new edition.